Hey, Al, I'm just going to jump right in. I've been talking with a lot of independent theater artists here in Minneapolis and St. Paul about things opening back up and going back to work. And I realized that this isn't new. The phenomenon of independent theater artists talking amongst ourselves about the decisions that are being made above our pay grade and how that impacts us. And the thing that I realized is that we talk like this all the time. And who knows if the stuff that we bring up to each other makes it into the eyes and ears of people who have power in our community, the decision makers at theater companies, the artistic directors. So I wanted to come on here. I was going to write a piece about this, but I think it's better that whoever is watching this can see my face and hear my voice for transparency. A lot of us have been calling for transparency in the communities, whether it's the theater community or the police and local governments. So if I'm going to call for transparency, I got to be transparent. So that's why I'm doing it this way and not writing a piece about it, so that you can see my face, see my lips moving, because I'm actually saying this. Maybe I'll transcribe it for accessibility. And yeah, I got like notes and stuff too. So, I know that there are a lot of conversations being had between independent theater artists about coming back, and specifically about what we don't want to come back to. I know that these conversations are happening because I'm having them, and the people I talk to reference other conversations that they're having. So I want to lay out one of those things that I definitely don't want to come back to, and that's the toxicity that is pervasive in our community, and how power plays into how that toxicity is perpetuated. There's a lot of pressure to not say anything. It's always been there, and the thing that we do as independent artists is like, oh, I had a bad experience over here, so I don't work there anymore, or I don't work with this person or those people. But that doesn't actually address the problem. We got to stop doing that, because that theater, that the leadership there, the people who have power to change things, they need to be accountable for what happens under their roof, on their watch. Otherwise, the abusers, the toxic people, and toxic behavior in our community keeps going, and more people get hurt. Why? So we can get the next job, so we aren't called difficult or problematic. So I'm here to say that we're not the problem. We only become part of the problem when we don't speak up about what's going on. So I have to walk in my own integrity. And when I heard Karen Olivo say the words, building a better industry is more important than putting money in my pocket, I felt put on notice, because she's right. I've been quiet for too long. I've been silenced for too long. In June of 2019, I wrote a Facebook post about Penumbra Theater hiring the former artistic director of Theater Moo, Randy Reyes, months after he had been fired from Moo, for cause. I don't know if I can say any more than that. Penumbra was having a safety event that seemed ill-conceived and unsafe, in my opinion. The reason that I wrote that post was because I was hearing rumblings in our community about how no one in the Asian American community was speaking up. And I want to be clear, we weren't speaking up because we were hurting and we were trying to heal. The Asian American acting community was hurting and taking the time to heal, while we watched someone who caused harm be given that same power back at a so-called partner organization without as much as the professional courtesy as a heads up. So I wrote that post. I'll link to it or something. And one of the things that I wrote in that post was a James Baldwin quote. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. Now, before I go on, I want to say that because I believe in transparency, I think it's important that I name my lens. I want to say that I am a cisgender, straight man, a Filipino, born in the U.S. to immigrant parents. I'm someone who was in an emotionally manipulative relationship, abusive relationship between 2004 and 2007. And that abusive former partner of mine still has someone in our community who is perpetuating the abuse, 12, 13 years later. And that's it. I mean, over the last couple of years, I've become more aware of narcissistic abuse that has been in my family, and I see a lot of those same patterns in the theater community. I just think that it's important that I'm transparent and accountable for the ways that I approach my lens, the ways that I approach the issue of power and abuse. So I wrote that post, and I heard from people who couldn't otherwise speak up for one reason or another, and they said thank you. They said they stand with me, which at the time was great. Then a few months went by, and I realized that theaters that used to call me about teaching gigs and diversity trainings weren't calling me anymore. A new artistic director was hired at Moo, Lily Tom Crystal, and it seemed like things were going to be fine. Things were going to be cool. Then, while I was volunteering at Moo to make space for Asian American artists to meet and train and build community with each other, suddenly my name was being taken off emails and taken off things online, but I was still being asked to do the work. I was told that since the work that I was doing was for the Moo community, Lily wanted to make sure that there was staff oversight, when previously she had told me, just keep doing what you're doing. The whole reason that I was volunteering to hold the space was because Moo didn't have staff hours to devote to this as an official program, but the thing is, I will always show up for the community. And the reason that I became an actor is because I was discriminated against a lot when I was growing up. And honestly, I got into theater because that was my way to make things a little bit easier for the next group coming up. I mean, if people coming up after me can have it a little bit easier because of something that I did, that's what I wanted to do. And doing that is way more important than putting money in my pocket. So when I started losing work and my name was being taken off things, I set a meeting with Lily Tom Crystal to see what was going on. And in that meeting, I did the same thing that I just did. I named my lens. I identified my bias. I told Lily that I had been gaslighted in a past abusive relationship, and that abusive woman that I was dating still has a friend in our community who is perpetuating the abuse, who is still trying to isolate me. And I told Lily that the way things were rolling out with the excuses I was being given about staff oversight and wanting to clarify roles, and she didn't want my name on stuff, and she was also still asking me to do the work, that was triggering the PTSD that I have from that relationship. I was feeling like I was saying that this is hurtful, and what I was hearing back was, oh, you're just being too sensitive. There's a perfectly good explanation for all of this. And I was told in that same meeting that Sarah Bellamy, artistic director of Penumbra, took issue with my using a James Baldwin quote in the Facebook post in June. And I was told that as a non-Black person, using a James Baldwin quote was problematic, even though Sarah had hired me to write scripts for diversity trainings for Penumbra because I am familiar with James Baldwin and Grace Lee Boggs and Carlos Pelosi and Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama. But what I was told was that as a non-Black person, I can't use the writing of a Black writer to criticize a Black organization. But if you're gonna say that you stand by the words of a great writer and that you aren't accountable to those same words in your own conduct, isn't that hypocritical? Isn't that the definition of hypocrisy? The thing that I wrote in 2019 was a lot longer than one quote, but that was the only thing that Sarah Bellamy seemingly wanted to focus on. And rather than come to me and talk to me about it, remember, she hired me, she has my email, she has my phone number. And rather than talk to me, she took steps to tell other artistic directors not to work with me, specifically the Twin Cities Theater of Color Coalition. And I guess if I said actions speak louder than words, then Sarah and the rest of the Theaters of Color Coalition would find something else to pick apart, instead of actually having to read the rest of what I wrote, which was about holding ourselves accountable, taking the note and making the adjustment, which is what we independent theater artists are asked to do all the time, and do it with a smile. So Lily Tung Crystal, having been artistic director of Theater Move for like 4 months at the time, chose to make Sarah Bellamy her constituency rather than the Asian American community, specifically an Asian American artist with 20 years of experience in this community. Lily told me that she and Sarah, at the time it was December 2019, that they hadn't actually spoken to each other about it. Lily was hearing that Pogi is problematic from other artistic directors in the Theaters of Color Coalition. Lily said to my face, and I quote, "We don't want you to appear to be a leader in our community right now." That's why my name was being taken off emails when I was volunteering to do work in the spirit of making our community stronger and better. It's been 2 years since I wrote that post and a year and a half since that meeting with Lily Tunkrystal, and I don't know if Lily and Sarah have ever talked about it or been in contact because Lily hasn't addressed it with me. We walked away from that meeting in December, and Lily said that once she got a hold of Sarah and had a clear idea of what the issue is, that she would circle back, and she hasn't done that in a year and a half. And one of the reasons that I'm making this video is because I heard from a friend, another independent theater artist. My friend was told by Lily that she's been sending me emails and I wasn't responding to them. So I look back at my email, and I've only gotten one from Lily that was meant to introduce me to the incoming managing director of Theater Moo. And I wanted to print it out to get it right. So in this email, she writes, Ang2 has heard from a number of us on staff about the great artistic work you've done with us and how supportive you've been to Moo over the years, in particular during the difficult times before we joined the company. It's that art and support we need again. This is gaslighting. I'm sensitive to this because I've been gaslighted within an inch of my life by an abusive partner, questioning my reality to the point that I thought I was going crazy. Lily knows this, and she's known since December 2019. And I realized that I was being gaslit, whatever, but not just by Lily, because she doesn't want my name associated with Theater Moo because I might be seen as a leader, but by that Sarah Bellamy is sending out other artistic directors from the Theaters of Color Coalition to do her dirty work, rather than just speak to me about it. After George Floyd was murdered in 2020, I posted something on my Facebook page that said Filipinos for Black Lives. And Rihanna Yazzie, artistic director of New Native Theater, commented publicly on that post. Now, we're Facebook friends. She could have sent me a message. She could have emailed me, but she chose to comment publicly. And this is the thing that they're going to say about the video. They're going to say, why didn't you come to us privately? If we've learned anything this past year, it's that sunshine is the best disinfectant. Putting our stories out there publicly is the only way to get even a modicum of accountability. So before they say that I was out of line for making this video, I want to remind you that Rihanna posted this publicly when she could have come to me privately. She says, Pogi, I've been sitting on this feeling for almost a year. I feel you owe Sarah Bellamy an apology. A year ago, her lifelong fight for racial equity was called into question using a James Baldwin quote on your page. It was liked and commented on by a mostly white audience of your Facebook friends. If we are all now talking about solidarity with the Black community, you might need to see how your fight for justice in your moment completely disregarded the context and reality of constant harm being done to Black people and the hurt that you caused a Black leader. I wonder if when you reread your post that maybe you can see the bias laced in and maybe reconsider your words, if not an apology. There are a few things to unpack here. There are a lot of things to unpack, but I'm only going to touch on a few. First of all, please don't try to lighten my skin. Placing me next to white people has never made me look lighter. It only highlights how I'm not white. So please don't do that. The people who liked and commented on that post did so publicly because they felt safe to. I heard privately from people of color, queer folks, other survivors of abuse who did not feel safe to comment publicly on that post because a Facebook comment thread is not a safe space. And let's just call it what it is. Rihanna, in that comment, is weaponizing the model minority myth. And I know you, Rihanna. I know you well enough to say that you are a strong advocate for your community, and you are better than that. Secondly, I'm accountable for the words that I say and the quotes that I use, full stop. I hope that I can live up to James Baldwin's words, but I'm not perfect. I miss the mark. I try to take the note and make an adjustment. And one quote that's been ringing in my ears these last weeks and months is, perfect is the enemy of good. So right now, I'm choosing good with the likelihood that I'm going to mess up because perfection is a tenet of white supremacy, and I'm not about that. I hope that my actions and my words match. And I've always valued the friends who hold me accountable. But to be really honest, My words and my actions haven't always matched this past year, because rather than show up for my Black siblings in the struggle, I stood back and I stayed home. Because this comment, Rihanna's comment on my post supporting the Black community in June 2020, that was the moment that I realized that what was happening, how my name was being discussed among the artistic directors in the Theaters of Color Coalition, possibly elsewhere, how that was so much bigger than I thought it was, and I got scared. So I stood back and I thought, maybe I am a problematic figure. I realized now that I believed Rihanna instead of trusting my own gut and just going with my own heart. I thought that maybe that someone might see me at a rally, and my presence, however I intended it, might further hurt the efforts for my community to be in solidarity with the Black community. So I stayed home because I didn't know to the extent of how many people have heard this lie about me. People who have the power to hire me, who can help me pay my bills. I talked to theater companies that asked me to serve in some capacity as an advisor, or really any kind of way. I told them that if my name is associated with their theater or organization, that there are artistic directors out there talking about me. And I didn't want to make those organizations look bad because my name was associated with them. So I stepped away because Rihanna's comment scared the crap out of me, which is what happens when people who have power prey on those people who have less power. It's one public comment, and it really affected my mental health this past year. But you know what else I did? I talked to Black activists. I talked to Black and brown theater artists. I did my own work on unconscious and implicit bias, because that's what I hope someone would do. Honestly, that's what I hope someone would do if I ever call them out. I hope that that instead of being defensive, they'd at least entertain the idea that maybe they're carrying some bias that they're not aware of. So I did that. I took the Harvard implicit bias test online. I took a bunch of other online assessments on conscious and unconscious bias. And guess what? I have biases. Of course I do. But it showed me that I don't have specifically racial biases. But I don't trust tests online, so I started watching TED Talks. I watched the Flip It to Test It, all that stuff. I went down a whole rabbit hole. But I talked to Black activists, some who know the theater world and our community, and some who don't. And I asked them if this phenomenon of non-Black people using quotes by Black writers to criticize Black organizations was something that I could look up. I asked them not to do the work for me, but to point me in the right direction, because I couldn't find any reference to this phenomenon online. Because, I don't know, maybe I was using the wrong search terms. And across the board, every one of the Black activists I talked to said, no, if someone's words don't match their behavior, that's a problem. If they are focusing on the James Baldwin quote, they're just trying to distract everyone from the real issue, which is their words don't match their behavior. One person I spoke to told me this. I told him I was going to steal it. He said that he's against injustice. And if you stand against injustice with him, then he considers you a sibling. So that's where I stand. After rereading my post and doing all that work and having discussions, I'll come to this. I don't need to apologize to someone who has perpetrated injustices that a lot of people don't know about and that people know about but aren't willing to say out loud. When Penumbra and Moo were partnering on a project together, there was a disagreement over the food for the opening night party. Moo was told by Penumbra staff that the subscriber base at Penumbra has high expectations and that Asian food just doesn't present well. So instead of getting their food from a locally owned Asian restaurant, which was Moo's suggestion, they went with a white-owned catering company. Not even a Black-owned restaurant or caterer. Penumbra didn't have a seat for Moo at the first rehearsal for that same project. It was a project that they were supposed to be in partnership. The Moo leadership that was there for the first rehearsal, they had to sit in the back. And they had to chase down the Asian American playwright whose play was being produced and introduce themselves in the hallway. So if Penumbra wants to be a center for healing, I suggest that they focus on healing the harm that they've caused. And that includes the Black activists that I talked to who either have had to leave town because they were blacklisted by Penumbra or have chosen to leave the theater business altogether. One artist I talked to is an openly gay Black man. He's an amazing guy, amazing artist. He's very outspoken politically. And when I reached out to him, not knowing why he left town, he said, we need to talk about this because I know exactly what's happening to you. And he told me the reason he no longer lives here is because he was blacklisted and he couldn't find work here. So these artistic directors are a tight group. I've been not asked back to theater companies who are not in the Theater of Color Coalition. So at this point, I have no idea who's heard what. All I know is that I had good relationships with those companies before 2019. I spoke with another amazing Black artist and activist who said they don't do theater anymore because of this toxic, behind closed doors abuse. I did a show several years ago with a white person cast as the Asian male lead, and I understudied that actor. And a forum was held, and from what I'd heard, the white artistic director, Peter Brocious, at CTC, apologized to the artistic director of Moo at the time, Rick Shiomi. Not to the cast, not to the people who were witnessing every day and living with the fact that yellowface was being done in the 21st century. Peter pulled Rick aside and apologized to him privately. And when Peter invited me to audition for a project in 2019, I told him I didn't have a good experience at the theater, I felt tokenized, and he responded by actually apologizing to me. He said that he was sorry. He said, we recognize that this was problematic and difficult, and we listened and we changed our casting policy so that doesn't happen again. But that was the first time I was hearing that. That was the first time I'd heard that apology. And I didn't know that for a good part of a decade. At the time, they didn't apologize to the Asian American members of the cast or even explain anything to us because Peter apologized to Rick privately, the artistic director of an Asian American theater. So we're good, right? Lateral power move, artistic director to artistic director. I mean, that's the logic. So let me say again, I will always show up for my community. And organizations by themselves are not community. You can't just go to the leader of an organization and apologize to them and assume that that apology trickles down to other people in the community. But I've seen it happen again and again, especially at theaters that represent a specific segment of the community. Because people think that just because you're the artistic director, that you speak for the community, that you represent the community. And in most cases, they don't. They just lead their organization, not the community. And it's not just happening at theaters of color. Let's not get it twisted. Some of the worst kept secrets in our community are about the abusive directors, abusive actors who keep getting hired in town, who keep getting reported on, and nothing happens. Or if they are held accountable, they just pick up and they take their bad behavior, their abuse and harassment to another theater company. Names that I keep hearing, some people I know, some people I don't. I don't always feel like it's my story to tell, nor would I ever out someone who suffered abuse at work because they're doing exactly what they need to be doing to take care of themselves. This is happening at theaters all over the Twin Cities, small theaters to large, equity, non-equity theaters. So let me be clear that this is not an issue of just a few theaters. This is not just happening at theaters of color. I mean, at this point, if the theater leadership isn't inviting scrutiny and accountability into the process and talking about how they've become more transparent in the last year, then it's up to us to scrutinize what those theaters practices before we decide to work with them again. I watched people who otherwise rallied against abuse and harassment in our community run to defend someone who, in my opinion, grossly abused his power as artistic director. I watched person after person defend him without knowing as much as I know in the situation. And they say that the accountability measures that were taken went too far. And when people spoke up to try to make our community and our industry more safe, they were attacked. It wasn't just me. Abuse and harassment are exactly what they are, no matter if it's your friend or someone you like who perpetrates it. And I watched a theater company do the right thing. Their leadership, they held their leadership accountable, and they should be commended. And I watched all these people cling to the devil that they know because change is hard. And it takes work, and it means that you have to be uncomfortable. And they weren't willing to do that. One incident of abuse or harassment in our theater company is our theater community is one too many. But I've talked to so many independent theater artists who have had experiences with abuse and harassment at theaters, at work, who have reported it, and that report either doesn't get to the person in power who can actually make a difference or do something about it, or they report it to the person in power who has the power, a person who has the power, and that person does nothing. So here's what I want you to do. My ask for you. If you're a donor, a subscriber to any of the theaters that I mentioned, and you're watching this, please keep supporting those theaters. Support Penumbra, support Theater Moo, support New Native, support CTC. We don't want them to go away. That's not the purpose of this post. Keep supporting those theaters and the artists who work at those theaters. And hold any theaters that you support accountable. Ask them what they've done to be more transparent and more accountable than they were 2 years ago. Transparency and accountability can't be something that we're just asking from the government or the police. If we expect other people, other institutions to be doing the work, we should be willing to do the work too. So ask if they're planning on adopting the Minnesota Theater Safety Standards. If you don't know what they are, what the theater safety standards are, Google MNTAC, MNTAC, or Minnesota Theater Safety Standards. Ask any theater you support about the steps that they're taking to keep the artists who work with them safe. In my opinion, that starts with adopting the Minnesota Theater Safety Standards and committing to putting them into action. Ask theaters how much of their funding ends up in the pockets of independent artists. McKnight, Jerome, Wilder, Propel for Nonprofits. I know you got $255,000 for the Theaters of Color Coalition in 2019. St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. Really nice videos about that on your websites. Corporate sponsors, Target, 3M, US Bank, Excel, Ecolab, RBC. You as donors, subscribers, audience members, ticket buyers, you have the power to ask these questions. We as independent artists usually don't, because we don't want to be labeled as problematic. So please ask and expect an answer. And for my fellow independent theater artists out there, I know we all want to be working again, but name your price. Most of the time, the only leverage we have is our presence. And I know that it's hard to turn down work, but let's all read up and educate ourselves on the trauma responses. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Let's all read up on fawn, especially, because we need to set strong boundaries. We can ask about the safety standards, what changes are being made by our theater leaders, how they are implementing changes, what they've learned over the last couple years. And I don't know if this needs to be said, but I'm choosing not to work with Theater Moo until they make significant steps to support the local Asian American artist community. I've said this to the Moo board. Last year, I watched Moo hold Zoom reading after Zoom reading where they cast actors who live out of town. A new artistic director, less than a year on the job. You'd think that they might want to take the time to get to know the local community, even if it's over Zoom. But most of the people in the screenshots that they posted of their readings were from out of town. And the main Zoom production they did this year was only 50% local. So when they had the opportunity to employ local artists, they didn't. And they bragged that their table read series was featuring artists from across the country. In addition to that, after I told Lily that there was someone in town who's been abusive to me, and for all I know, is still trying to isolate me from support systems, she hired her. Lily hired that person in the fall of 2020. So until Theater Moo stops knowingly hiring abusers. I'm taking my Asian Studies degree and 20 years of experience in regional theater in the Twin Cities and across the country, and all the institutional memory I have of Theater Moo since 1998, where I got my start, over 3 different artistic directors. I'm gonna take all that to an organization where I'm valued and respected. I know this is long already, and if you're still watching, thank you. A lot of us have been talking about what it'll look like when we go back to work, and it can't look like it used to. I don't want to go back to that. So, to wrap up, I want to say this is going to be on the internet. So, to quote Brene Brown, if you want to criticize from the cheap seats and you aren't putting yourself on the line too, I'm not interested in your feedback. June Jordan wrote, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And I'll just leave you with Karen Olivo's words. Humanity is more important than my bank account. Building a better industry, a better community is more important than putting money in my pockets. I want a theater industry that matches my integrity.